So in our next example, what we're going to do is implement our own theme function, keeping these essential concepts in mind. So go ahead and jump to your module directory, and we're going to open up the fourth step, which is adding theme functions. Go ahead and copy the code. I'm going to close out a couple of files here and paste it into your .module file, overwriting everything that's in there already. In this example, what we're doing is creating a theme function that adds a strike-through type style to a string, and then we're invoking that theme function. This requires three parts. First of all, we have the implementation of the theme function itself. Then we have the invocation of that theme function in our code. And finally, we need to register our theme function with the theme registry. So let's talk about the theme registry for a second. You may already be familiar with the idea of a registry if you've watched some of the previous videos that mention the menu registry. The theme registry works in a very similar way and for a similar reason. Instead of, on every page load, seeking through all of the different potential overrides to theme functions and template files, what the registry will do is go through all of this processing once and create a registry in a database, and then on every page load, it's just that registry that gets loaded instead of running through all of that processing. One more nice thing about the theme registry is that it allows modules to play a trump card on the final theme function or template file that gets called for a particular theme implementation. So let's go ahead and go through our example here. All of the new code that was added to this file starts here and it ends at the bottom. And we have our three parts. Here's our invocation, here's our implementation, and here's our registration with the theme registry. Okay, let's start at the implementation. So we have our comment here that explains what our theme function does. And then we're passing it a single parameter called variables. And you'll see this used throughout all of the theme functions. Instead of passing separate parameters for each variable or setting, it's all pulled into one array and passed as the variables array. And then we're returning a very simple HTML formatted version of the variable's string that gets passed. And this is the only variable that we're expecting, this string. And we're wrapping it in a span that includes some styling, changes the background color to red and the font color to white. And then we're wrapping a strike tag and an EM tag. If you're thinking that there's a better way to do this with CSS, you're right. And I'm going to use this as an example of how to include a CSS file with a theming function. Okay, next let's look at our invocation here. We're adding a title here, again, to delineate between the different examples. And then we're adding to the output theme, and then we're passing it look and feel underscore strike, which is the name of our theme function here, minus the theme underscore. And then we're passing in an array. And as you probably have already guessed, we just want to pass it one item through this array, which is the string item, and we're passing it some text. So when the theme function gets called, it's going to take this text here, and it's going to slip it in right here inside of all of this HTML. Now, if this is all we added to our module file, it would never run because we haven't registered our function with the theme registry. So the next part is to use hook theme to add it to the registry. Our theme function is fairly simple, but you're going to use this same structure in the implementation of hook theme, even if your theme function is a little bit more complex. So what we're doing here is returning an array, and inside of that array, we're using a number of key value pairs. The key corresponds to the name of the theme function minus the theme underscore. So one thing also that I wanted to point out here is that when you do implement a theme function, you want to prefix the function with the name of your module. And the reason why we do this is the same reason why we prefix our variables with our module name as well as our functions. It's to avoid namespace collisions with other modules. So we're assigning this key an array, And this array contains a number of parameters that are passed to the theme function. The variables parameter contains all of the values that we would expect to be passed through the variables array that gets passed to our theme function. There are additional parameters, and we'll go over a couple of these later when we talk about template files. But there's only one item that we want to pass through the variables array, which is our string, which corresponds to what you see here. If we had additional parameters that we wanted to pass through the variables array, we could add them to the end of this array here. The value that we're assigning to this key is the default value that our variable will take if it's not specified when passed to the theme function. So if nothing's passed, it will be null, and by convention, anything that's not an array or that you want to set an explicit default for should be null. Now, because we're adding our theme function to a registry, we'll need to clear our cache in order to make sure that the theme registry gets rebuilt. So let's go ahead and save our module and jump to our browser. And I'm going to use the admin menu flush all caches button, but you can also go under configuration, development, and performance to clear the cache. Okay, this will take just a second. And when it loads, we should see an example of our theme function here at the bottom. Sure enough, here it is. So we have our CSS background showing, and we have a strike through, and it's emphasized. So all of this points to the fact that our theme function is running properly.